Lori, thank you so much for being here. This is a real pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, this is such an important topic because it's something that affects absolutely everyone. So, I'll start with an obvious question, but it's actually a lot more complicated than it seems, as your work well demonstrates. What does it mean to be happy?
I mean, I think we could take, many, many hours on that question. I could teach a whole class just on that question alone. But I take a very nerdy approach to thinking about what happiness is. I use the social scientist definition. And most social scientists think of happiness as having two parts. It's being happy in your life and with your life. So in your life is like, are you just experiencing positive emotion? Do you have joy? Do you have laughter? Do you have fun? And is the ratio between those positive emotions good relative to the negative emotions? It's not that you have no negative emotions. In fact, I imagine we might even talk about this, but it's just that the ratio is pretty good. That's kind of happy in your life. But happy with your life is different. It's the sense that you're satisfied with your life. There's meaning and purpose in your life, right? And so I like this definition because these two parts can sometimes vary, right? Think of when you have a young newborn at home, right? Like the with your life, oh my God, this new baby, so much meaning. But the in your life, it's like dirty diapers and lack of sleep, they can kind of vary. And then I think you can have it the other way too. Think of the Instagram influencer who has so much, perceived hedonism in their life, right? Like so much sense of they're on vacations and doing this stuff, but with their life, there's a sort of sense of emptiness and so on. And so my take is like, if we can maximize the in your life happiness, you're having lots of positive experiences and emotions, and the with your life happiness, you feel like you're doing something meaningful, then that sort of makes for a real happy life.
Do you need both of those things in equal measure, or is one more important than the other?
I think there's all kinds of times when we have trade-offs on these. I think the newborn baby is a good one, right? It's not going to be, dirty diapers and lack of sleep forever. You just have to get through that period. And I think there's all kinds of times where, we might be struggling with a sense of meaning and then double down on, some of the positive emotions and the fun side, but then we need to get back to things that might feel a little bit more satisfying. But, what we see in a lot of the empirical works is that the strategies that really matter for happiness, the ones that kind of really work, and we find lots of empirical evidence showing, hey, we should be going after those things, they tend to be ones that maximize both. So take something just simple like mindfulness, right? Like this act of being present. This can allow us to notice and experience more positive emotions. You're like tasting your coffee in the morning, or you're present to look at your spouse's smile, right? But it can also allow you to have a little bit more meaning where you're present and are thinking about the big picture and so on. And so a lot of the practices that really matter for happiness, the ones that researchers like me talk about all the time, those are ones that ideally are going to maximize both of those things at once.
Now, you mentioned something like a good cup of coffee or the smile of a loved one as markers of happiness or things that make you happy. But people tend to think of the grander things as being what will make them happy: having money, having wild success, having the man or woman of their dreams. What are the things that people actually think will make them happy? And what are the things that actually do make people happy?
Yeah, well, they're not one and the same, which is a little bit frustrating. It means we get happiness wrong. But you listed them so nicely, right? Like money, accolades at work, the perfect relationship, the perfect shoes, the perfect body, right? I think there are all these goals we put up there and we say once we get to those things we'll be happy, and there are two problems with that. One is we have this notion that researchers call the arrival fallacy. It's kind of the happily ever after fallacy. Like once I get that thing, once I make this amount of money, once I get this promotion, once I find that perfect partner, then I will be happy, in theory, forever and ride off into the sunset. But what the evidence suggests is like happiness kind of takes work. Happiness, we tend to go back to baseline with happiness. My colleague Nick Epley is fond of saying that happiness is like a leaky tire. Like you're kind of going along, and occasionally you need to pump it back up again. And those kinds of things, accolades, money, and so on, we get used to them much more quickly than we expect. They're not the best ways to pump up our leaky tires. Better things are things that we often don't put in those categories of dreams we have or things that we think will make us happily ever after. They're often like the simple things, getting a little bit of social connection, doing nice things for other people, engaging in different thought patterns, like being more grateful, being more present, simple healthy habits like exercise and sleep. These are the kinds of things that when you dig into the evidence, you find those are the things that matter a lot more, which is a problem, right? Because it means when we look at our calendars and what we're investing in, when we look at our long-term goals, it's often not like, let me find a lifestyle where I can have more social connection, or let me plan my day so that I'm maximizing the number of random acts of kindness I do. That's not what we're investing in. but that's what's going to do the most work in terms of getting us the well-being boost we're all searching for.
You are speaking to moments of joy, many, many moments of joy. Is that really the basis of happiness, of just a life filled with as many moments of joy as possible?
I think moments of joy, but also moments of real meaning. Think about the act of doing something for someone else, right? This is the kind of thing that gives us joy, not because like we're necessarily getting pleasure, but because we're investing in a social relationship, because we're doing something meaningful and nice for another person. Just we're doing something moral and good in the world. I think we can kind of get stuck in this idea that happiness is all about the like in your life part, like pure hedonism, like like vacations and bubble baths and that and unicorns and rainbows, right? But in practice, like happiness sometimes takes challenge. Happiness sometimes takes doing things that are difficult. Happiness sometimes takes navigating and recognizing and allowing your negative emotions. And so, in all these different respects, it's just not what we think it is. And that's a real problem. It's not, so many of the women listening out there, it's not like you're not investing in your happiness. You're probably like going like hardcore girl boss on trying to make your life as good as it can be. The problem is that if we have the wrong intuitions about the things we're supposed to be doing, it means we're putting tons of work in, but we might not be getting the results we think. And often that doesn't cause us to say, well, maybe my whole notion of happiness is wrong. It's not about money and success and so on. It's about these other things. Often we think like, oh, maybe I'm just not doubling down enough. I need to put in more time at work. That salary that I thought was good before, nope, I need to think about getting another job where I can make more money. And so we get in these cycles where we really double down on strategies and good things, good in quotes, things in our lives, but they're not the things that really matter for happiness boosts.
I would love to turn the conversation to women specifically and our path towards happiness. Is the path to happiness different for women as compared to men?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, the basics that I just mentioned are pretty much the same. I think where women can sometimes go astray is that we often on the path to happiness don't give ourselves much self-compassion, right? When you hear all these things that I've just mentioned, if you're like me, you might be like, all right, tomorrow I'm going to get all the social connection and exercise and sleep and presence, right? We have trouble engaging with these strategies for happiness in a way that involves some like baby steps or not being perfect or recognizing that we're just human and maybe every single thing I mentioned just needs to go on hold, in the midst of the current like COVID pandemic that we're in, for example. And so I think a spot where a lot of women can improve would be engaging in a little bit more self compassion. Oftentimes, we think that the path to success requires being like this horrid drill sergeant in our head where we're like yelling at ourselves and like, how dare, we speak to ourselves in ways that we would never speak to the people close to us, hopefully. And we think we do that not because we're, sadistic. We do that because we think that that's the way to do it, right? Like how else will you achieve your goals? But what the science shows is that speaking to yourself in a self-compassionate way, recognizing you're human, giving yourself some self-kindness, these are not just paths to feeling better, but they're also paths to being more effective in your life, to getting things done that you want to get done. One study that I love shows that people who are more self-compassionate procrastinate less. And the reason makes sense when you think about it. It's like if you're not screaming at yourself in your head, you're not as worried about messing up. And so it's not as scary to start. And so that means you start more often and then you get more stuff done. And so I think this idea of, recognizing your common humanity, giving yourself some grace, these are strategies that so many women should take on if they really want to feel a little happier.
Now, you mentioned the pandemic. The pandemic has taken a mental toll on so many of us, but the studies have shown that women specifically have really suffered when it comes to our happiness and our overall life satisfaction. So one statistic that I find interesting is that one of the greatest groups where we've seen an increase in drinking and problem drinking is among women. And of course, you add to that the anxiety, the stress, the added responsibilities from childcare that were placed on us during the pandemic. And you see this effect on mental health and happiness. Why do you think that women responded to the pandemic in this way? Was it about social interaction? Was it the added childcare burden? What do you think was specific to women in this pandemic that really contributed to our suffering?
Yeah, well, honestly, I mean, I think it was all of the above, right? If this pandemic was built to specifically attack our mental health, or if I was building a pandemic that would specifically attack our mental health, I would mess with our social support systems because we need those, mess with our routines, because when you mess with people's routines, that causes all this uncertainty, kind of your fight or flight system's up, is like, what's going on? Throw in a whole like bushel of anxiety in there about like, are we going to get sick? Are my kids going to get sick? And, throw the weight a little bit more on childcare in a really uncertain time where work and childcare are mingling together. Like this pandemic was a recipe for unhappiness, and particularly women's unhappiness, to the extent that work-life balance and the childcare balance got really disrupted. I think also another issue with, you mentioned this sort of alcoholism and sort of alcohol rates going up and things. I think this gets back to something else, which is that, we have a hard time when things are tricky, right? We think that there's this idea we should put on a stiff upper lip and just pretend nothing bad is happening. We have trouble giving ourselves grace sometimes. And one of the most surprising results in the field of positive psychology, or the field of sort of happiness research, is that taking time to allow and engage with your negative emotions rather than avoiding them can be a surprising path to happiness. Why are you drinking? It's like, everything's terrible and I just need to pretend it's not terrible, right? But, if you could sit there and say, I'm annoyed, with my spouse right now, or I'm upset with the kids, or I'm kind of scared, or I'm just frustrated that I can't get back to the office, or I'm frustrated that I have to go back to the office. I don't want to be there right now, right? Taking a moment to allow those emotions, recognizing they're happening, just saying, I don't have to love this, but I just have to sit with it. Turns out that that's a path to getting through emotions in ways we don't expect. We often avoid emotions. It feels like we've done something wrong or we want to run away from them. But the science shows that they're good signposts. They're telling us that something's wrong, and we annoy them we avoid them at our peril, right? Like if we just kind of ignore these things, we miss out on the great messages that they're providing us with. So, one strategy, especially if you are on that avoiding, maybe drinking a little bit more and so on, what if you just allowed those emotions? They're not going to feel great, but the path to get through them is actually to go through them. You need to really experience them.
It was such a relief to hear you describe the pandemic as the perfect storm, because I really thought there was something wrong with me for falling apart the way that I did, because I tend to think of myself as a strong person. So I'm happy to hear that even an expert on mental health says this was a huge, huge challenge. So then the question is, how do we bounce back from this? What is the path back to happiness as the world starts to return to normal? How do we return to normal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really starts with giving yourself some grace. When you hear those thoughts going to, I wasn't supposed to, feel frustrated or sad or anxious or whatever it was, I should have done better. These kinds of terms, these very black and white ways of thinking, these shoulds. I often tell my students that they're shoulding all over themselves. Ha, ha, ha. Right? But when we hear these kinds of shoulds of what we're supposed to do, that's a moment to give yourself some grace. Nobody made it out of this thing without feeling a little bit scared, sad, frustrated, anxious, upset with themselves, some bad habits creeping in there. We all kind of went through it together, but we all want to believe that we're the one strong one, this unique snowflake that powered through this without being affected. I think the first step to navigating this is to recognize that you're just human. This was an unprecedented pandemic that hit our mental health in all kinds of ways, and it's okay not to be okay. That allowing the non-okayness is a really important first step, because it reduces this kind of drill sergeant mindset, this kind of paranoia that there's something wrong with you. It allows you to say, yeah, none of us are okay, but we can experience that. We can go through it. We can reconnect with other people who are going through it the same way, seek out social support and provide that social support. And really, that's really the path to getting better. It's kind of acknowledging this wasn't great, but the moment of acknowledging that allows you to now embrace some strategies that might be helpful for feeling a little bit better.
Yeah. When it comes to the messaging of happiness, you made the distinction between what people really think will make them happy versus what actually makes them happy. And those two things are often not aligned. Why do you think the messaging is so wrong? I mean, people by and large believe that money and success and love and beauty and being thin and all those things are going to make them happy. Why is the messaging so wrong?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, I think, capitalism thrives on getting the message wrong. If we're all kind of content with the delights in our life, people wouldn't sell cars and things like that, right? But so part of it's that, but part of it is that our minds are built wrong. It's not, we might want to blame all the advertisers and the cultural messages, but those kinds of things that we seek out incorrectly, they're there without a lot of those messages. They're the kinds of things kids are picking up very early. They're the kinds of things that we're built to go after. We're kind of built to strive. Evolution didn't and natural selection didn't necessarily build minds that were happy to just like be content and allow the, things to just be the way they are. They wanted us to like get out there and survive and reproduce. And that means that we have minds that are constantly going to be built a little bit more to strive more than we maybe need to. They're going to be minds that are built not to enjoy the stuff, but to focus on the negative things, because you don't need to notice the good taste of your coffee, but you need to notice if there's a tiger sneaking up on you to get you, right? So our minds have this negativity bias. Seems like we're just built not to be as happy as we could. The beauty, though, is that we don't have to be, at the mercy of our evolution. I'm talking with you now with contact lenses on. Biology built me like not to see very far at all, but with the beauty of science and technology, I can do better. We just need to bring that science and technology to our own happiness. When you know the right evidence-based strategies, you can put them into effect and not be at the mercy of the kind of striving and bad stuff that natural selection built you for.
So very quickly before we go, I want to ask you, do you have one or two happiness hacks, things that when you're feeling low, you've done everything right, you've maybe gone through the difficult emotions, but now you really want to feel a little better, you want to boost your mood? What's your happiness hack, your go-to?
Yeah, well, the go-tos are all great in the sense that we can control our happiness. This is another thing to remember is we think we might just be at the mercy of circumstances, but actually we can train our brains to pay attention to the positive things. We can train our brains to pay attention to things we're grateful for, and doing so can really have significant changes on your well-being. So my two favorite hacks these days are finding delights in the world. There's lots of practices of finding what you're grateful for and so on. I sometimes choose to call them delights, which are just like delightful things out there in the world. These days we're in New England when we're having this conversation. I'm in New England when we're having this conversation, and it just snowed, but not that much. And people make like tiny snowmen, just a delight. Like the fact that like I just have coffee in my house when I thought I was out that morning, like delight. Like these little tiny things seem silly, but they're training your attention and your brain to notice that there are good things out there in the midst of a lot of yucky stuff. And that profound switch in your attention can have a big impact on your well-being. So that's one, is focusing on delights. And the other, which sounds silly, but is profound for our physical bodies, is just taking time to breathe. This system that kind of gets all revved up when we're feeling anxious and scared or annoyed with whatever frustrating injustice is going on in the world, that's our fight or flight system, what's called the sympathetic nervous system. And once it's on, it's cranking, right? It's stealing all your body's resources away from resting and digesting, what's known as the parasympathetic nervous system. And there are not many hacks once it gets going, as often, like once you're in that spiral, you're in it. But one hack that is under our conscious control is our breath. Just the act of taking a really deep belly breath, and especially a very slow exhale with your belly breath, activates what's known as the vagus nerve. And that kind of turns on this rest and digest system. Like, it's kind of cool. There's not many hacks into these very unconscious, like automatic systems, but your breath is. So when someone tells you, hey, just take a deep breath, they're not being pedantic. Like, they're tapping into a biological system that allows you to hack how anxious or how queued up you feel. So when I'm sometimes even in between Zoom meetings, I'll take a stop and just do, deep breath and really slow exhale. And even if you're doing this now while you're watching this, if you notice how you feel afterwards, it's just like, it's just like a little, I've stepped down a step on feeling as anxious or as kind of like raged up as I might be. And it's just a simple thing, but it's, a quick hack you can do in 2 minutes in the midst of a workday. Definitely a powerful one when the kids are getting annoying. It's like walk into the other room, deep breath. Again, you have to get away from the like, oh, deep breath. Like, no, deep breath is actually affecting your biology in these really important ways. It's your power over your own system that you otherwise can't control. So those are mine. Noticing some delights. And when it's hard to find the delights and things are feeling tough, take a deep breath.
I love those. And this conversation was a delight for me, and I'm sure it was for so many others. Lori, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.